Okay, let's continue our discussion. Okay, so now we are moving into a new chapter, right? But actually, depending on the textbook you have, they may put this lecture and the previous lecture in the same chapter, right? Whatever textbook you have, the way you read is just look at the keywords or the content they have. Okay, so they may just have different title. Now we are going to ready to look at this aggregate expenditure model. What we are going to do here, so essentially we are going to look at this equation again. So y equal to c, y plus I, and y. Okay, so we are going to look at this equation because what we have done in the previous lecture is look at this component and this component separately. Now we are going to bring them together, okay? And you're going to see, so when y is changing, either increase or decrease, okay? And you're going to lead to c and I to change, okay? So maybe one item, maybe both, but we will see what's going on. So this is going to change, okay? But this, once this change, this is going to break the equation, break out this equality, right? So that being said, that just means, okay, so you're going to see an adjustment process, or you're going to see a particular y such that this is true, right? So you're going to see, so whenever this y is too high, or whenever this I is too low, we are going to see adjustment until the economy is reached to this equilibrium point, when left-hand side equal to right-hand side. All right? Okay, and then the key things here is going to happen through inventory adjustment. All right? So that's what we're going to do, what we're going to see in this lecture. Now, so we are going to work on an income expenditure model, okay, as this title states, right? And in this background picture, it highlights the importance of inventory, okay? And inventory. So inventory plays a central role in the economy. But again, so what is inventory? How we understand inventory? Right. So this background picture tells you how we understand inventory. Right. So if you go to a local car dealership, okay, if there's no car in the yard or there's no car in their garage, they only have car in their paper, like in their document. Okay. So most likely, so they won't have much deal card because most of the customer won't be patient enough to wait for them to get the car when they cut the deal, right? So that's why they put some inventory, okay? And similarly, if you go to the grocery store, if you go to the checkout and then the cashier told you, so everything is on back order, okay? Can you wait? Can you wait for a week for them to give you the aid you need today? Probably not. So that is why they have inventory, right? Okay, so the actual inventory may differ from the actual demand. Why is that? It's because nobody knows exactly what is going to happen, right? Okay, so but they only have a planned inventory, okay? But overall, so here the point is inventory plays a central role in the economy. If inventory is running low, that just means your sale was very good. If inventory is very high, that means you cannot sell your stuff, right? So those are good indicators to understand the direction of the economy, right? But now in these lectures, I'm going to explain to you how things are going to move, okay? So to start, we need to make a few assumptions, because these assumptions serve as two purposes. One is to simplify our analysis. And secondly, so this assumption is going to tell us where is the boundary of our theory holds. Okay, so you need to be very careful. Okay, but certainly, so I will explain to you what would happen if we relax those assumptions. Okay, so the assumption we made are the following. Number one, change in overall spending leads to change in aggregate output. This just essentially just says the demand determines output or Y, right? Because see, so here changes in aggregate output, which is Y, is going to cause by spending. What is spending? It says the demand. Okay, this is number one. The second, oh, by the way, so in the next chapter, we will relax this assumption by looking at demand and supply together. Okay, instead of only look at demand. Now, second, interest rate is fixed. Right? Okay, in the next chapter, we will relax that assumption. You're going to see interest rate, or essentially price, will be determined in equilibrium. Now, the third assumption essentially says no government. Okay? And the last assumption essentially says no rest of the world. So actually, these two assumptions just says the spending will be equal to C plus I. And then combined with the first assumption, just says, okay, so that's going to determine Y. Or in other words, Y equal to C of Y and I of Y. All right, okay. Here to summarize what I just said. Right? So in our simplified economy, GDP equal to C plus I. Right? And then this is coming from spending. And so YD equal to GDP. Okay, this is coming from income. Okay. And so we have our aggregate consumption function, which is learned in previous lecture. Okay. Now, we assume I planned is fixed. So this is a reasonable assumption. Right? So the business, think about the car dealership, grocery store, okay, or department store. Okay, so they need to make up a plan how much I'm going to invest, how much inventory I'm going to put, so that we meet the demand for incoming holiday. Right? So this is a reasonable assumption says this planned investment is fixed. And so given this, so now we have this aggregate expenditure. By the way, this is planned aggregate expenditure equal to C plus I, but this is planned. All right. So this planned aggregate spend is the total amount of spending that was planned by the economy. Okay, so including the households, including business. Okay, so this is the plan. Right. So now we can working with this model by looking at example. Right. So from the first column, we have real GDP. Right? And then, so in the second column, we have disposable income. Okay, these must equal to each other. Okay? Now we look at C. You can see C is going to adjust with YD. And how your C is going to adjust the YD, it follows this rule. But this is our consumption function. Right? So you can see even though your income is 0, so you must spend 300. So your income increased by 1,000. And your spending increased by 600. right? So 900 minus 300 is 600. So now your income increases from 0 to 1,000. Okay, so that reflects marginal propensity to consume. Okay, so this is consumption. I planned it. So this is planned investment. Okay? It's fixed. It's regardless of your income level. So we always have a plan of 500. So just think about, say, iPhone. Okay, before the announcement of their new iPhone 12. So they have a plan. So they're going to produce 30 million units, right? And where did the plan coming from? Coming from the past data, like demand in the past cycles, and plus their reading of the current economy, right? But that's a fixed. Okay? Now we add C and I all together. So that is the planned aggregate expenditure, right? So you have this column. Okay? So this I and C and I add together. So essentially, they just plan in some sense. This is a planned GDP in terms of expenditure, right? So now, if we look at this table very carefully, okay, you're going to see there's only one row. So in this row, you find out real GDP equal to YD. That's no surprise. But then a surprising sense is in this row, YD equal to AE planned, or in some sense, your guess. So this is your guess, right? So your guess regarding to demand in the economy is equal to the actual GDP. And so in this row, so we are going to see we are in the equilibrium. Now, the next things I need to explain to you is, so what would happen if we above this row or if we below this row? Will we coming back to this row? If we can coming back to this row, what are the force behind the movement? Okay, so those are the main things I'm going to explain to you. Okay. So now, I'm going to put the things we just discussed in this graph and give you a virtualization. Okay, so we start with consumption function. So remember, 300 is autonomous spending. The slope of this consumption function equal to I believe it's 0.6. 0.6, right? So it's 0.6, that's slope. Okay, this is consumption function. So the consumption function essentially is the consumer's plan in terms of their consumption. And their consumption will adjust with disposable income. But a disposable income equal to real GDP in this simplified word. Okay, so this is consumption function. Now we add planned investment on top of consumption function. Because this planned investment is fixed. So that essentially you just move up this line, right? And then so you're going to reach aggregate expenditure. Again, this is a plan. This just says depending on the level of disposable income, which equal to real GDP. Okay, so I'm going to have a aggregate expenditure, or the economy is going to have a aggregate expenditure following this purple red line or brown red line, right? So this is how the economy is going to behave. Okay, now let's see. Sorry. Now, as I explained to you earlier, right? So there's only one line, the aggregate expenditure plan equal to real GDP. Okay. The question is, what would happen if we are not in this row? Okay. So let's see. Let's just skip this for a second. So let me just want to show this one, right? So and then we're coming back. Okay. So first, give you a big picture. So this is what we have, right? So aggregate expenditure. Okay. Now this 45-degree line cross with this aggregate expenditure line, and that just tells you what. So by the way, 45. What is particular about 45-degree line? So along 45-degree line, the value on horizontal line equal to the value on vertical line. Now, if 45-degree line cross with this line, meaning they're cross at this point, okay, so the aggregate expenditure plan must equal to GDP, right? Because they cross with 45-degree line. Okay. Now, if for some reason, right, so we were expecting the real GDP or disposable income is 2,500 billion. And then, so people is going to have their plan in terms of consumption and in terms of investment, right? So the consumption will follow this line, and the investment was fixed at 500. And certainly we can go back to the table we saw previously. But to save the time, so I'm going to tell you, so if everyone was expecting the disposable income or real GDP is 2,500 billion. And so that's going to imply a planned aggregate expenditure of 23. Right over here, 23. And then as you can see, there is a gap of 200. What that means? Means, okay, so we expect of income of 25, and we produce 25. So this is supply. But turns out the actual expenditure, actual spending, actual demand is 23,000. So that means, so you can't sell your stuff. Your inventory is adding up. Just think about in the car dealership, right? So they overestimate, they produce too much car now, so they cannot sell their car. So the inventory pile up, they just show up as unplanned inventory investment go up. So if you have unsold car, unplanned inventory investment increase, or you have unsold iPhone, what are you going to do? Right? So this is very similar to the story we have discussed in micro, or when we talk about supply and demand. So now, the firm will cut their plan. They are going to reduce their production. Meaning, so the economy is going to move to this side, because this just reduced production, right? Okay, we move to this side. Now, say for example, so the adjustment becomes too aggressive, right? So your output declined to 1,000. This means disposable income declined to 1,000. Okay. Now, at this level of disposable income or this level of GDP, okay, so you're going to find out what is the aggregate expenditure. And then, so you see, so this is going to be 14,000. Right? So essentially, we just look at this equation. Okay. Now, with 14,000, but you only produce 1,000, there is a shortfall of 400. What that means? That just means in the car dealership, so they adjust their production. Okay, they just bring the car very slowly. But it becomes too slow such that so you get some like back orders, right? Because you just get rid of your inventory so quickly. Okay, so you really cannot satisfy the demand from your customer. So that is going to be a signal. The GDP has been underestimated. The demand is pretty strong, and so everyone will expand their business. So we are going to move to the right hand side, right? Okay, until we reach the middle point, we call it Keynesian cross, until we reach this point. So nobody want to adjust, nobody want to deviate, nobody want to change, right? So summarize, okay, let's just go back. Let me start with this slide. Okay, so let's just quickly summarize what we have discussed here, right? So whenever you have produced too much, and then so you have inventory you cannot get rid of, the unplanned inventory investment increase. So that's a signal you have produced too much, so you want to decrease your GDP. On the other hand, so if you produce too little, and your inventory is not enough to satisfy the demand, your inventory runs low, right? And so you have a negative unplanned inventory investment. So that's a signal, so we haven't produced enough. So that's give you incentive to increase your output. So you can see the GDP is going to increase, right? So until we meet in the middle point, there's going to be no adjustment, and actually we are in equilibrium. Okay, so this is the adjustment process. Now let's just backward to see original slides we skipped, right? So where we are, so we are here, right? So we are in this slide, right? So we have this table, right? I just showed you there's one row, so your real GDP equal to planned expenditure, and then we are in equilibrium. And then so I just explain to you with slides. From the slides, you can see if your real GDP is too high, that's the row we look at, right? And then the expenditure in terms of consumer and the business will below your real GDP or below what you produced. So that's going to lead to increase in unsold inventory. So that's give you a signal you produce too much. So you're going to move up to reduce. On the other hand, if we adjust too aggressive, we end up with producing 1,000 and an income of 1,000. Okay, so now by looking at this schedule and this schedule, so you can see, so the aggregate expenditure will be 14,000, right? So now you can see there's a shortfall because you produce 1,000. The demand is 14,000. There's a shortfall. So this shortfall is going to send you the signal you produce too few, and then you want increase. So until we reach this line, so we are good, right? So that's the adjustment I just explained to you. Okay. Here just summarize. So if firm have an overestimate sale, in a sense, the GDP is too high. You produce too much. In the case we just discussed, you produce 2,500. Okay, and then there will be unintended addition to inventory, and unplanned will be positive, meaning so you cannot get rid of your stuff, right? So you start to pile up your inventory. On the other hand, you underestimate. So in the example, we have 1,000. You produce too little. There will be unintended drop, right? So your inventory is running low. And actually, so this becomes negative, right? So you cannot fill your inventory before the new goods you produce come into your warehouse, right? So you can see in either case, there's going to be adjustment, right? Now let's look at this practice question to reinforce what we just discussed. suppose the level of planned aggregate expenditure is 500. Real GDP is 600. So that just means you produce more than people is going to plan to spend, right? So you cannot get rid of your inventory. Your inventory start to pile up, right? So the answer is A. Unplanned increase in inventory are occurring, or the unplanned inventory investment is positive. Okay. Now this just mathematically show you the graph we just discussed, right? So GDP equal to C plus I, but I equal to I planned plus I unplanned. Okay. Actually, so this the first two terms is called aggregate expenditure planned, right? Okay, so whenever GDP is greater than this one, whenever this is greater than this one, meaning this is positive. Whenever GDP is less than this term, meaning this is negative. Okay, and then so we are going to have adjustment. Okay, I can write down. So case one, GDP greater than AE planned. So this implies I unplanned is positive. You produce too much, you pile up your inventory. On the other hand, GDP less than AE planned. Your I unplanned is less than 0. You're running low in your inventory. You produce too little. In the first case, you want to reduce your GDP. In the second case, you want to increase your GDP. Until when GDP exactly equal to aggregate expenditure planned. Okay. So that's kind of reflects by this picture, right? So there are 2 points like work against each other, and at some points we reach equilibrium. Okay. There's no adjustment. The economy is in income expenditure equilibrium when aggregate output is equal to planned aggregate expending, or Y equal to AE planned. Okay. Again, just remind you, so there are 2 cases. Y is greater than AE planned. Y is less than AE planned. Okay, so they are going to have adjustment accordingly. Okay. And then income expenditure equilibrium GDP is a level of real GDP at which real GDP equals to planned aggregate expenditure. And that's exactly this cross point in this diagram. And this cross point we call Canting cross. Right? I want to emphasize all the story we told so far. We said demand determines output or determines GDP. Right? So demand is the key. Okay. So that is the equilibrium coming out from this income expenditure model. Okay. So now we can look at these practice questions. So this is a diagram for Outlandia's economy. Suppose, so this economy is currently at point B here. Okay. Question, part A, question A. Is this an income expenditure equilibrium for Outlandia? So actually here, AE planned greater than Y1, right? This is Y1, this is what you produce. So this implies I unplanned is negative, right? So you cannot meet the demand. Inventory unplanned inventory investment is negatives. So what are you going to do next? So the firm is going to increase production, or you move to this side. Okay. B, what level of GDP will this economy produce at equilibrium? At C, right? When they cross each other, or when AE plan equal to Y, right? So this is when we are in equilibrium. C, at what level of GDP is unplanned inventory investment is positive, right? So this is ask you when AE planned is less than Y, you produce too much. Okay, actually any point on the right hand side, so you have unplanned inventory investment is positive, and on the right hand side of point C, so you may want to adjust by reduce output. Now last part, at what level is planned aggregate expenditure greater than income? So certainly that's on left hand side of C right here. Okay, so your plan is above the 45-degree line, so that's above your income. Okay, and eventually we will adjust by increase production or increase the income, so that's D. Right, so I will stop here for today. So I'm going to see you on Monday. Right, thank you so much for your attention.